This video tutorial will show you how to create 7 simple stitches that you'll use in embroidery. The first stitch I'm going to show you is the back stitch. So you start at the end of your stitch and you pull the needle up and then you go back through where the front of the stitch would be. And so you're basically doing the stitch backwards. So you go forward by bringing the needle up, you're kind of skipping a space, and then you're filling it back in when you go backwards with the stitch. So again, you go forward the space you want your stitch to be, and you put the needle in, pull all the way through, and then insert it at the end of the previous stitch. This stitch is great for outlining things. If you want just a straight line, you can use this stitch. It works well for lettering. It's just one of those simple stitches that you gotta know so that you can embroider. This next stitch is called a split stitch. So you start it the same way you start a back stitch. You start at the front of your stitch and go backwards. And then to create the split stitch, you're basically splitting a stitch in half. So you go up through the middle or wherever you want on that stitch you just created. So you're splitting the threads and then you're going forward. So again, you go up through the middle of that stitch you just created, so you're splitting the threads, and then you go forward. And it creates kind of a textured stitch, so it's not just your, you can't see necessarily all the different stitches because you're splitting them in half, so they're kind of all running together. It's kind of a more fluid stitch, but it's got some texture to it. This next stitch is a chain stitch, and I'm going to do it in orange. You start by beginning at the front of the stitch and bringing the needle up through the bottom, so the knot is underneath. And then you put this needle down, again, kind of right next to the stitch where you just came up. But instead of pulling it all the way through, you're going to leave that loop, and you're going to bring your needle in front and put it in the middle of that loop. And you can go ahead and pull that tight. Then to secure that down, you're going to put the needle down next to that loop, but instead of pulling it all the way through, again, you're going to leave that loop open and put your needle in front and put it through the middle of that loop. And that will hold the loop there, making it a chain. And you continue to do that. I like to use this stitch for giving texture. If I want to have like a rope look, I'll use the chain stitch. You can also use it to fill in lettering, or you can use it to outline things. This next stitch I'm going to show you is called a stem stitch. So you begin the stem stitch by starting at the front of your stitch and moving forward one, like you would use for a running stitch, which I can show you later. And then you go back to the middle, but instead of splitting it like we did with the split stitch, you're actually just going to bring the needle right next to the stitch, not in the middle of it. And then you'll move it forward once. So again, you'll bring the needle up to the side. You're going to go up the same side that you went up the first time. So you'll bring the needle up the side. And then you'll bring it back down a stitch forward. And so you're creating this, it's called the stem stitch because it looks like kind of a twisted stitch that kind of gives the look of like a flower stem. That's when I use it, especially when I'm doing like flowers. And it's a really simple stitch. Sometimes I have a hard time getting the needle up right next to the stitch and not splitting it, so you can kind of move over with your thumb. So here we have our stem stitch, and it works even for like lettering. I also use it for that. But here's the back of it. It just looks like a back stitch, and there you go. This next stitch I'm going to show you is called a satin stitch, and it works to fill in a shape. So here I've got a rectangle I'm going to fill in. So you start at one end of the shape, just pick a corner or whatever your shape is, and you're going to take that from one end to the other. And so I'm going to do mine up and down, and you pull it all the way through, and then you take your needle back up to the top where you began your first stitch. Bring the needle up and then put it back down just right next to the other stitch. And so you'll do this until you fill in the entire shape that you're trying to fill in. This is a super easy stitch to do. It kind of takes a lot of thread because you're using the same amount on the front as you are on the back, but it gives it a really nice finished look when it's done. So I've finished filling in this rectangle. And it's just smooth, and it's the same on both sides because of the way we were stitching it by going back up to the top every time. But it's just a really pretty simple stitch. And I could also have done this from one side to the other going long ways. You just do the same thing. You insert the needle first going up, and then instead of going up and down, you can go side to side. And this will actually go a lot faster since will essentially be making less stitches because they'll be longer. But so that's also an option. And so now that stitch is done, and it's long ways, and it looks the same on the back just like the other one did. So yeah. The next stitch I'm going to show you is called a French knot. So I'm making a little knot. So I do this by inserting the needle up through the fabric and pulling all the way tight. And then what you have to do is you have to use two hands. You'll pull the one side tight and you'll wrap it around the needle. I'm going to do it twice, but you can do it any number of times. And then you insert the needle in back next to where the thread is coming out of the fabric. Make sure you pull that string tight so that the knot doesn't get loose. So you continue to pull it tight until you've pulled the knot all the way through the fabric. You can let go of that string just right at the end, and there you have a French knot. So I'll go ahead and show you one more time. You insert the needle up through the fabric and pull it all the way tight. Then you'll have to use two hands. You'll wrap the thread around the needle. I'm going to do it 3 times this time, and it'll just give me a little bigger of a knot. Then I insert the needle back in where the thread came out of the fabric the first time, keeping that string pulled tight, and then you just pull the needle all the way through. You can let go of that string once it's close enough to being pulled all the way through. And there you've got your knot. The last stitch I'm going to show you is the Lazy Daisy stitch, and I've gone ahead and drawn the shape of the flower that I want. And I'm going to start by inserting the needle in the middle of the flower. I'm just going to pull it all the way up, and then I'm going to put the needle back into the fabric right next to the thread that just came out of the fabric. And I'm going to be careful not to pull the string all the way through. I'm going to leave the loop just like we did with the chain stitch. I'll bring the needle up at the end of my flower petal through that loop. And so when I pull the string tight, now the loop has stayed. To tack that petal down, I'm going to just do a simple stitch over that petal by inserting the needle. And there we have our first petal. And then you just continue that. So bring the needle up, insert it down right next to the thread that just came out of the fabric. And remember not to pull it all the way through. And then sometimes I like to hold the loop so that I can fiddle with it with my other hand. You pull all the way tight, and then you just do a simple stitch over that petal so that it doesn't come out. And there we have our second petal. So you just do that around the flower, and then once you've done all 5 of these little petals, then you're done with your flower. Again, you begin the stitch by just going up through the middle of the flower, pulling a string through, and then placing the needle right down next to where it came out. And then you're going to put the needle through the loop. Sometimes it helps to hold the loop like this so that it doesn't come out. So if that's helpful for you, you could try that. And then you just want to tack it down with a stitch. So there you have the Lazy Daisy stitch. Here's what the back looks like. And it's perfect for making a simple flower. You can also use it for like the leaf on a stem for a flower. But it's super common, and I'm sure you'll use this stitch a lot. Thanks for watching this video tutorial.